everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's Leadership Series webinar, The Importance of Mentorship Upskilling in an Era of Rapid Change. We're so glad you've joined us. Today's webinar is presented by Lake Forest Graduate School of Management. I'm Brandon Crystal, Manager of Admissions and Corporate Accounts here at Lake Forest, and I'd like to take a brief moment to tell you about our school. Lake Forest is a not-for-profit school offering a fully accredited MBA program and customized leadership solutions. With regard to our MBA, I'd like to quickly highlight a few of our distinctive qualities. First, I want to mention our commitment to developing our students' leadership skills. In addition to learning business fundamentals and gaining confidence beyond their functional expertise, our students benefit from our leadership model, which hones soft skills and focuses on important traits, including self-awareness and agility. Lake Forest provides unmatched flexibility for working professionals. Our MBA courses meet one evening per week, and students can join in person or via live video conferencing from anywhere. We also offer our courses online. And because our courses are 8 weeks long, you can complete your MBA at your preferred pace. Finally, one of the most unique aspects of Lake Forest is our business leader faculty, one of which you'll hear from today. Our MBA courses are taught by 100% business leaders, meaning our instructors are out in the business world practicing what they teach. They are CEOs, CFOs, vice presidents, and directors who bring real-world practical experience to the classroom. For those of us joining today from Allstate and Blue Cross, I also want to mention our on-site MBA partnerships with these companies. We have long-standing partnerships through which employees of these companies can earn their MBA by taking classes at the headquarters or by joining the classes via live video conferencing from talent centers, field offices, or from home. The next opportunity to join the programs at Allstate and Blue Cross is our fall term, which begins the last week of August. Now I'd like to introduce a member of our aforementioned business leader faculty and today's presenter, Max Reed. Max has been a member of our business leader faculty since 2012, and today he serves as our Senior Vice President of Education Programs. Prior to joining Lake Forest, Max was VP of Program Sales at CDW, where he led a business unit of over 100, supporting sales of more than $4 billion per year. Today, Max will talk about the importance of mentorship upskilling in an era of rapid change. Max?
Thank you very much, Brandon, for that introduction. Thank you, everyone, for joining the call today. I want this call to be interactive, although we're doing this over WebEx. We do have I believe it's the IM and the posting up here, so we want this to be interactive. We do want to hear from you guys a lot on some of the content that we're going to be covering today. I think that there are some things that we want to share, but we'd also love to hear from you guys as well. I think you have a lot to offer. So let's take a look at the next slide here and talk about the agenda. I do want to talk about change. As we've all heard, so much is changing so often. I do want to give you some perspective about what's causing change to happen. But then, too, I also want to talk about, as this change occurs, how do people experience you in terms of that change? And that'll be our lead into why mentoring and upskilling is so critically important when you're navigating a constantly changing environment. Then I'm going to leave you with some tools, some questions, if you will, that you could sort of ask yourself on a daily basis to think about how well are you doing in areas of focus that you may think about as you continue to navigate this journey and get the mentoring and upskilling that you need to be successful. So let's go ahead and jump right into the material and start the conversation here. This is one of the data sets that I find most impressive when talking about change. And what you're looking at is the average lifespan of companies in the Fortune 500 over the last, I'd say, 20 or 30 or so years, with the red part there being from 2021 on, forecasted out to 2025. And as you can see here, the life expectancies of companies are going down, meaning that companies are either evolving or getting bought out or going into different markets. There's just a lot of activity going on in terms of the lifespan of the company that's causing this high volatility. And that being said, that kind of rapid change is requiring us to keep up, if you will, not only in terms of our skill sets, but how we manage ourselves, how we manage others. And so this is just a really interesting data point to really show what's really pushing for that change. And I can guesstimate here by just looking at the trends here that the life expectancy is going to get even smaller. So this is interesting here. If you want to go to the next slide, a second data point about what's causing the change, and there was a study conducted by Dell that did research on the jobs of the future. And what they came back with was pretty surprising, and that was that 85% of the jobs that will exist in 2030, they haven't been invented yet. And that's pretty surprising, because what that tells you is that the rate of change in the economy is speeding up so fast that even jobs that we've traditionally recognized today, tomorrow may not be in existence, but as a matter of fact, you may even have new titles that are going to be in existence. And so pretty interesting data. I encourage you to look up that Dell study. It's pretty informative about what we're looking at for the future. But what I want to do also is to go to the next slide here and talk about just not even 30 years from now, but what careers did not exist just 10 years ago. And here are some of the titles of careers that are fairly new that was not in existence 10 years ago. Of course, the first is the Chief Learning Officer. You have Corporate Social Responsibility Officer, and you can just go down the list here, Social Media Manager, SEO Analyst. All of these are newly created roles over the last 10 years, which is quite surprising. Because I thought maybe all of these roles would be in IT, but as a matter of fact, they're more than just IT. They're in other disciplines as well when it comes to Chief Learning Officer and corporate social responsibility, which is becoming a strategic imperative for a lot of companies. And so as you think about that, what are those data points telling us about the future? What is it telling us about how we need to operate more effectively in this changing environment? And I would suggest here that as we go to the next slide, that the way that we used to think about our careers have fundamentally changed. If you look at the left side of this slide here, we were very sort of traditional in our approach, meaning that if you were in finance, you started as a financial analyst, and then you worked your way up as a financial manager, and then at some point you did some accounting and financial planning, and you sort of worked your way up through finance to ultimately become a CFO or potentially a CEO or something in that vein. Or if you're in operations, you sort of took this vertical path in your career, and that made sense. But I would argue, because of the changing in economy, because of the rate of change and the volatility in the change, that your career going forward is going to look more like the right side of the slide. It's going to be a bit of moving forward, moving left, moving right. You can totally find yourself in a completely different discipline as you navigate your career. So it's less likely that you're going to take this sort of linear vertical path, and it's more likely that you're going to, I've seen one data point suggest that you'll have 7 different titles within a 15-year career, and 2 or 3 of those can be in completely different business units than you've traditionally worked in. I think that's factually correct, because as you start to move up the management level, anyway, you end up having folks working for you that you don't have too much of experience or background in that discipline. And so this is how these things tend to work out, that as the broader the base, the taller the tower. So as you start to learn multiple things about a business and being able to operate in different facets of that business, you become more agile, you become more flexible, and you've got a holistic view about how the business runs, and that only helps you to continue to grow your career. So that volatility is causing your path in terms of your career mobility to look more like the right than the left. And so as we sort of lay that as a foundation for our conversation here about what's changing, why it's changing, and how things are going to look fundamentally different in the future, I want to try to pivot to you as the operator in that environment, moving to the next slide and trying to understand, how do people experience you as you navigate through all of this change? We've talked about things constantly changing. You're having to be more agile, more flexible. You're having to potentially do some roles that you traditionally haven't done before. The likelihood of you taking the vertical path is becoming less likely nowadays. Some of the jobs that you'll have 7 different titles over 7 years. Over 15 years or so, you may have 7 different titles. And some of those titles haven't even been invented yet, if you will. Could be brand new titles that you're not aware of today. And so the fundamental question becomes, to you as an individual, as you navigate through that change, how do people experience you? That's the question that we want to get to, and that's going to lead to our discussion when we talk about mentoring and upskilling. So let's go to the next slide here as we think about how you navigate change. I want to hear from the group some feedback on the group on this slide here about what's your initial response to change. I know you've all have dealt with change before. It seems to be the only constant nowadays, but where do you fall within these three boxes? One being it was exciting for me. I usually embrace change. One is it made me a little anxious. I'm a bit hesitant, but I tend to find my way through it. But we got this third box here about being uncomfortable with change. So let me just take a quick pause and see what we get on the chat line here. And Brandon, as those come in, Brandon will read a few of those out. So where do you fall in this box, in one of these three boxes?
Got the first two saying that the change was exciting. Got another exciting, someone saying that they were a little more anxious. Another vote for exciting. That's good. You guys are embracing the change. That's a good thing. But I'm sure probably some others of you were in the second and third. We've got another for exciting.
Okay. It sounds like exciting. It seems to be winning out quite a bit, and that's very positive. That's very good to hear because, again, we all as humans tend to deal with change in different ways, but there are some similarities as well. And as we move to the next slide, I want to talk about how we tend to deal with all of these different changes, and this gets down again to a personal level, and that is as we start to recognize that change is occurring, this is sort of that what we call the emotional cycle of change. And the first, of course, is this: once we see the change occurring, it's this sort of pessimistic view about the future, right? What's happening? Why is it happening? How is it going to affect me? And we start to do this sort of search for information, so we're uninformed about what's going on, and that's moving to this uninformed optimism. We're open-minded to the change, but we're uninformed, and we're going to naturally seek information. But what's important here is what happens after this step. Oftentimes, there are those who sort of get caught in the valley of despair, if you will, and sometimes it's difficult to find your way out of that valley of despair, but it's only through finding your way and navigating your way through that you ultimately achieve success. And this cycle here is one that I'm sure you're probably familiar with, as many on this call have experienced change. But you're going to find that you're going to navigate this cycle a little bit more frequently over the next 10 years or so than you have the previous 10 years. And so as you start to become more familiar with this cycle and you start to find yourself in this cycle a bit more frequently than others, what's important is that you understand, first of all, the skills that are needed in order to navigate the change and how you go about acquiring those, and then secondly, how do people experience you while you're going through this change, if you're going to see this change happening more often. And so what I want to do next, and thank you everyone for your comments, your feedback, greatly appreciated here. What I want to do next is, as we think about this as a foundation, this sort of emotional cycle, is to go to the next slide and talk about some research that was done at Harvard, Amy Cuddy and Glick over at Harvard, that talks about how we experience people going through this change. And when we think about this change, when you talk about how people are experienced, how we view them, you've got a 2x2 here where the bottom is really competence, right? It's that skill level that you have, and the left side is low with the right side being high. And then on the warmth side, which is a part that we've got to talk about here, the bottom is low, the top is high, of course. And so as you navigate change, if you have not taken the time to upskill yourself, that means you're on the left side of competence, and you have not been able to successfully navigate that emotional cycle of change that we were talking about, then people are going to experience you with contempt. They're going to more than likely want to desperately avoid you. because not only do you not have the skills, but you're dealing with the emotional challenges within the valley of despair, if you will, and it's very difficult for you to get out of that space. It becomes a challenge for you to navigate your way out. Therefore, your colleagues, your coworkers, people around you, people that work for you, people that you work for, they start to experience you in a very, very negative way. And so that is that sort of bottom left bucket that we call contempt, and folks tend to desperately avoid you in that regard. But when you are upskilling yourself, that is the sort of competency part of the argument, and that's still at the bottom there, right? But you have not navigated that emotional cycle effectively yet. Although you are very competent, you've upskilled yourself, you've got more skills, more education, more tools in your tool bag. If you haven't dealt with the emotional side of it, then people tend to sort of envy you, that they mildly want you around because of your competency. But it's very difficult for that relationship to persist because there's a tension there that folks seems to be unattracted to. So although you have the competency, although you have the skill, how people experience you tends to still be unfavorable. On the left side at the top there, it's the same thing where when you have low competency, you have not upskilled yourself, but you have dealt with the change successfully. This is what we tend to call folks will pity you, or you mostly avoid it only because they're happy to be around you, but they recognize you have not kept up with the skills that are necessary in order to be successful. We appreciate the job that you've done in the past. You've done great work in the past. We love being around you. We love you as a colleague. But now we're doing more complicated, more advanced things that require a different set of skill set. And without those things, people tend to pity you from how they perceive your perspective. And then the optimal place to be, of course, is to increase your skills through upskilling and to also increase your level of warmth. And warmth is this sort of universal term that speaks to how other people perceive you and how you deal with others. And so if you've got that high warmth, if you've got that high competency, then these are what we call our lovable stars, our most admired people. These are the people that we're most attracted to. They're competent, they've improved their skills, and they're warm, they're inviting, they know how to work well with others. And so when we look at this combination of both things, then this is where we tie both mentorship and upskilling together, that you absolutely have to have both of these in order to be sort of competent at navigating change successfully. And so let's go to the next slide, and then let's pause. We have a couple of questions coming in.
Yeah, so we have one comment, and I didn't know if you wanted to touch on this. Kind of probably goes back to the slide about how career paths have changed so dramatically. We had a comment that age is often in direct relation to one's ability to manage change. Do you see that maybe people at different points in their career, navigate that change a little bit differently?
I'm not sure if it's necessarily age-related. I've seen folks that are fairly new in their careers navigate change better than folks that have been around a while. I've seen the reverse. I've seen folks that are new in their careers not able to navigate change very well at all. And so folks that are very tenured not able to navigate change at all because it's a different set of circumstances, it's a different set of concerns. So I'm not sure that age plays that much difference in it. However, I would say that, of course, experience matters, and so when you've had more time in rate and dealing with change, you become better at it. So I would say the group that are a bit more tenured, that group is probably larger, but not to say that it's simply because they're older, but because they're more experienced.
Right. And then a comment, the standard change is manageable. However, she says when you're considered an introvert, any change is you kind of want to avoid it. How can someone get past maybe their natural introversion when it comes to dealing with change in the workplace?
And that's a really good question about introvert versus extrovert. And introverts tend to have misconceptions about them because they're not the ones that are trying to be the center of attraction or trying to be the first person to speak and all of those wonderful things. But I think as an introvert, in terms of a personality characteristic, in managing change, there are what we call coping skills that you build around your persona, so that some of those perceptions don't become reality to others. So, for example, introverts have been known to be misperceived as being disengaged, or being uninterested, or not as involved, and all of those things cannot be furthest from the truth. But because perception can be reality, those with sort of this introverted personality have to be aware that sometimes those perceptions can be out there, and so you do have to build coping skills. This is one of the things that we teach in our leadership course, that not only introverts but all different personality types have both what we call pros and cons associated with them. So recognizing that could happen sometimes, you've got to build coping skills around doing change. How do I become a bit more vocal? How do I become a bit more sensitive to perceptions about me being disengaged as an introvert? How do I make sure that my colleagues know that I am heavily involved, heavily engaged, and that I'm navigating the change very well? So those are just things that you got to pay attention to and be sensitive to, and you've got to build coping skills around them so that those perceptions don't become reality and it ends up affecting your brand in a negative way.
And then, Max, you might feel that you're going to get to this one naturally, but another question is, how do you cultivate openness and positive attitude toward change early in someone's career?
I think you cultivate that by being that yourself. I think what we talk about in our graduate program is the law of reciprocity, and that is as you treat others, they tend to treat you that way. And so if you want others to be sort of open and receptive and giving and flexible, you've got to show those kind of leadership behaviors. And if you're willing to show those kind of leadership behaviors to others around you, you're likely to see others to behave in that way, especially if you are in a position of influence. And when I say position of influence, I don't necessarily mean titles or position of power. What I mean is influence over others, and that is not having direct leadership over them, but you can influence them by the relationships that you've built. So if you exhibit those kind of behaviors, you're likely to see those behaviors returned in kind. Okay. So moving on to the next slide here, I'm going to reference the previous slide in this, and the point that we're driving at here from a leadership perspective is that it's not enough to just be upskilled, or when you think about the rapid change in the economy and your ability to remain relevant in terms of your skill sets, that's only half the equation. That's not the whole equation. You've got to seek out mentors that can help you navigate that emotional cycle, that can help you to understand how others view you, that can help you to build those coping skills around perceptions that can strengthen your brand. I would argue that not only is the skilling part critically important, but the mentoring part is just as important as well. Because there are things that, especially when environments have changed, that there are things that you can understand on your own. There are other things that those who have been in that environment could potentially help you with. And I believe if you're wise to why you need both of those, especially looking at the Harvard data that shows why both are important, equally important, then you're going to be in that top right quadrant of those who are admired, those who are successful at navigating change, those who tend to draw people towards them when change is occurring versus behaviors that are considered unfavorable. Of course, when you talk about navigating change and things become uncertain, that uncertainty can drive those behaviors that can be damaging, if you will, especially in a change environment. So we encourage you to think about upskilling. That's critically important, but also to seek mentorship to make sure that the warm side, the soft side of your skill sets are also being improved as you navigate your way through it. And so that's what we want to leave you with here to understand what it takes to be successful, both sides of the equation. This next slide here is going to be a set of questions that I think can help guide you in terms of well, what do I do? How do I create tools for success? And these questions are important because these are questions that I don't think you should really ever stop asking yourself. As a matter of fact, these are questions that I ask myself every day. And the first is, how often do you seek out mentors? we all wake up in the morning and we have our to-do list. We have 10, 15 things on that list, and unfortunately, by 3, 4 o'clock of the day, we've only got 3 of those things done, and then we just carry them over the next day. That list keeps building. But the question that I ask, when you think about change and how critically important this is that on your to-do list? Do you make time out of your day, out of your week, out of your month, out of your quarter, out of the year? Do you make time? Is there time set aside for you to reach out, start building mentors? I can't tell you how much in my career, one who was blessed enough to be VP at a Fortune 500 company at the age of 42, I got there not because I was the smartest person in the room, but because I had a lot of great mentors really helping me in areas that I needed help, which ultimately made me successful. And so I would suggest you ask yourself that, am I spending enough time building my mentorships or building my relationships that is going to help me to move my career forward? The second is, how often do you mentor others? Giving back, of course, is one of the best ways to receive blessings from the universe. But you've got to ask yourself, how often do I mentor others? How much am I helping others to move their careers along as well? And that becomes a part of your mentoring side of the equation when it comes to mentoring and upskilling. The third here is, how do others experience you during change? And this is one of the questions that we raised earlier. This is one that you've got to constantly ask yourself. This is really getting to the self-awareness piece of managing change, and that is, how do others experience you while you're going through that change? Some change you can kind of sort of read the tea leaves and be aware that something is about to happen, and you can prepare for it, and you tend to deal with those better. But other change is just it was unplanned for. It was completely sporadic. And so when you go through that kind of unplanned change, how do others experience you? How do they experience you every day? Now, where do you fall within that quadrant? Are you considered undesirable? Are you mostly avoided because you've got competencies, or do people draw themselves towards you when change is occurring? Do they trust you? Can you build trusting relationships? Can you build a collaborative environment when that change is occurring? Are you able to deal with the things emotionally in a way that others are wanting to be around you? All of those things are critically important. The next here is, do you have a written plan for increasing your competence and being more relevant? Now, this is getting back to the competency side of the argument. We often wait until the change happens, and then we try to improve our skill sets. And I try to encourage people all the time, don't wait for change to happen. You should be constantly trying to improve your skills. One of the things that surprisingly that we see in higher education is that it's sort of inverse relationship, that when the economy starts to go down, people run back and get higher education. That's always baffling to me, because you don't want to wait till that happens. You want to start pursuing that higher education now. You want to gain those skills that are absolutely essential to a changing economy now. You don't want to wait to do that. And so you should have a plan in place. Of course, that plan will change often, but at least have a written plan in place about what you want to pursue, how you want to pursue it, how you want to remain relevant in terms of upskilling, and then stick to that plan. Have some level of execution and discipline assigned to that plan to make sure that you're not waiting until change happens to be the most relevant in terms of upskilling and building your mentorships and building your personal soft skills. Those things should be happening now. It should be just a part of your everyday cycle of learning. And then the following one here, the last one here, is, how would you rate yourself in terms of personal agility and resilience? The reason why I ask that question is we always tend to believe that we're more resilient and agile than we really are. It's the whole theory of what we call the looking glass self. And asking yourself that constantly, and then, of course, seeking out others to get feedback on that is critically important, because although we have perceptions of who we believe we are, of course, there are others that may experience us in a completely different way. They may give us information that we may find to be very helpful in terms of helping us to understand our level of resiliency and our level of agility. So these are a couple of questions out here that I wanted to leave you guys in terms of tools, but then I also wanted to ask from you guys, what are some other questions that we can put up here that can help us in terms of building more tools for developing our skill sets in terms of upskilling and developing mentorships? I'd like to hear from you guys. What else would you add to this list?
Yeah, so feel free to chat in some additional questions that we should be thinking about as we develop tools for success. As you do that, we had a question regarding this slide from Max, which is how does one approach a mentor? I'm reading into that question a little bit. You might feel that if you're going to someone with a busy job, they're busy, you don't want to impose, you don't want to maybe put time on their schedule, that maybe feel selfish. How do you kind of seek out those mentors and use their time wisely?
Sure, that's a really great question. I would say start with those who you already have relationships with. So those could be colleagues, that could be your immediate boss, people within your social network that you may know on a personal level. The relationship piece is critically important in mentorship because you want to receive feedback from those who truly understand who you are as a person and what it is that you do. I've always found that those who I have personal relationships with tend to be better mentors because they gave me the feedback that I really needed. Oftentimes when that mentor relationship is sort of structured, if you will, and there is no previous relationship there, it's really hard for that mentor to give the mentee the important feedback that's absolutely needed. And so the time is not what I call as substantive, if you will, in terms of making sure that both parties are getting something out of the transaction. So those that you have relationships with, they want to see you do better. They want to see you succeed. They want to see you get your career to the next level. Therefore, they're going to tell you things that you need to hear. But if that's not relationship-driven, if you've had no previous relationship, sometimes that can be very hard to do, and you get into sort of this time management issue. And so I would encourage you to start with the folks that you have relationships with. Before asking someone to be a mentor, try to build some sense of relationship with them. Try to share information so that they know a little bit more about you prior to requesting mentorship. And I think if you take that approach of building the relationship first, I think the time that's spent within that mentor-mentee relationship is going to be more substantive.
So we've got a couple suggestions for more things to think about. One is a 360-degree review on how you're doing, so get some of that outside feedback. One comment is think about what skills that you have are nuanced to the organization and or your position, and what skills are universal. Another comment or question is what do you have available to you and what do you need to search out? For example, company learning or internal learning and development versus outside learning. We also have, these are great, thank you very much. We have another question. Get back to the question here. Someone said, is seeking out mentors a contact sport? What they mean is the more you contact, the better chance you have to connect. So is seeking out mentors maybe more of a quantity or quality game, or both?
That's a great question. For me, I've always leaned towards quality versus quantity. And I wouldn't say mentorship is a contact sport, but I would say relationship building is definitely a contact sport. It is something that takes time to do, and you can't get away from the human factor in building relationships. And when I say that, what I mean is you've got to spend time with people in order to spend relationships. And that's not through email. That's not through instant messaging. That's not through a mentor, app, if you will. But you've got to spend time with people to build relationships. And if the relationship precedes the mentorship, then it's likely to be successful. Now, I'm not saying that if all you have are mentors but no relationship that you can receive any value. I think there's some value there, but I tend to lean much more towards quality versus quantity, and which means that it's going to take a bit more time to build a relationship piece and then build the mentorship. And I think that's more substantive than the quantity argument of contacting as many people as possible and getting as much feedback as possible from a lot of people without them knowing who you are as a person and the value that you bring and your uniqueness, your God-given talents. Without having all of that context, I'm not quite sure the feedback is going to be as substantive than if they did have all of that. And sometimes that takes time to build, and to build good mentor relationships, it takes time. You've got to be patient with it.
A couple more suggestions for this slide, a couple that are kind of in the same vein. It's great to have mentors in the focus area in which you can picture yourself. That way you can obviously use them to lead you in that direction. Another person said, use your personal network outside of work to seek out mentorship linkages in different industries and functions, so not limiting yourself to your current role. Another person said, continue to learn about emerging technologies, engage with leaders to understand their current issues, and look for ways to help them solve them. And I'm just scrolling through to see if there's some more here. These are great, thank you.
Oh, great feedback, great comments. Thank you very much. We greatly appreciate that. I think it adds a lot to the conversation here. So now we still have a few minutes left, so I want to pose one question out to this group in terms of when you think about this sort of connection between upskilling and mentorship. Have we underestimated the value of the soft skills side? Have we underestimated the value of building mentorships as we navigate change? Has that been something that we have not traditionally talked about? And if so, then how would you suggest that we talk about it more? Because this is definitely something that we want people to better understand to be more successful from a pragmatic perspective about what really works in business when you're navigating change. So have we underestimated historically mentorships in terms of building better change, building better abilities to navigate change? That's the question I want to put out there to this group.
Feel free to chat in your answers. We have comment, trust is underestimated. Another person saying it's not talked about enough. Another person said totally. Very much in agreement.
Okay. Well, as we draw this to a close, I do want to encourage each and every one of you to think more broadly about navigating change, about the importance not only of the hard skills, the upskilling, and getting those what we call hard skills in order to be relevant, but recognizing how critically important it is to get the mentorship side of or the soft skills, if you will, to get that support. And both of those together is what's going to make you successful in navigating change. One without the other, you can have a very difficult time being successful. So I'll stop now and see if there are any last questions out there, any questions, any final comments, and I'll hand it back to Brandon here. Any questions for anyone?
Yeah, a couple, of course, any questions, but a couple comments. In my years of experience, seeking mentorship is not talked about enough. There's an opportunity to build this skill in organizations. Another person said, I think soft skills are absolutely critical in building relationships and mentoring people. Another person said, I seek out mentors often, and surprisingly successful people enjoy mentoring others, so that's good. Keep in mind that as you're seeking out mentors, people enjoy doing that, and you're not necessarily burdening them. That's something that a lot of people value. Connection is invaluable in making sure we're all communicating clearly and understanding each other's needs. Change develops growth, and I have to practice at this, says one person. Max, I don't know if you have anything to add to this. Certainly we've touched on it a little bit, but someone asked how or what is the process to get the most out of a mentor-mentee relationship?
Sure. That's a great question. I think it's, first of all, there has to be a certain level of honesty in those relationships. We tend to only want to talk about those things that we feel positive about. And we sort of leave it up to the mentor with the mentee to figure out what the gaps are. But I would say to get more out of it, be honest about how you feel, what you're experiencing, and be honest about what others are experiencing and sharing with you. Give the mentor what they need to give you the feedback that you need. And sometimes we tend to shy away from that, and that's the whole point of the relationship, is to make you better through guidance. So I would encourage us to be as honest as possible with our mentors, even with things that we're uncomfortable with sharing. Share as much as you feel comfortable with, of course, but don't shy away from those things that you feel like could be potentially judgmental or feedback that you're not comfortable with hearing. I would say that you're missing out on a great opportunity when you hold those things back.
Is joining a networking resource group a good idea to build relationships and find mentors?
I think absolutely. Network resource groups it's an efficient way to do it because everyone is sort of seeking the same thing. They want to grow their networks. They're wanting to get to know people better. They're wanting to build relationships. So I would say that I found in my career those are very efficient ways to use my time.
Can mentors be sponsors?
That's a really great question, and I love that question. I'm glad it came up because we believe here through experience as business leader faculty that there is a fundamental difference between mentors and sponsors. They are not the same thing. And in short, a mentor is someone saying something to you, while a sponsor is someone that's saying something about you. Those are two fundamentally different things, and each has their own different set of consequences. Of course, when you're talking about sponsorship, that gets into someone that has what's called professional capital. And professional capital is your brand capital, your reputation. They've got influence. And if I am sponsoring someone, what I'm saying is I am willing to spend a bit of my professional capital on the performance of this individual. I think this individual is ready, which means that there is a risk that I'm taking to do that. But in mentorship, that's not the same thing. In mentorship, I'm talking to you, not others, so there is very little risk in terms of my professional and my social capital. When I mentor you, I'm trying to help you, but when I sponsor you, I'm trying to not only help you, but help something else externally, something exogenous, such as the business or relationship, or try to help you to get somewhere else. So we can spend a whole hour on the difference, but it's our view here from a business leader perspective that those are not the same things.
We have someone joining us from India, and he says, when you work in a different location, how do you cultivate mentors and build those relationships kind of remotely?
Yeah, great question. As we move more into this virtual world, I try to encourage people to think about technology in a fundamentally different way. We tend to use technology transactionally, meaning that if we get an email, we only reply if we get an email from someone else, or seldom do we even use text messaging or instant messaging unless someone is instant messaging us. But there is evidence that shows, it's the John Gottman ratio if you want to look it up, but there's evidence that shows that saying positive things about people tend to pull them towards you in terms of building relationships. And what better tool to do that with some of the tools that we have today with Skype and instant messaging and things like that. So what does that look like from a practical standpoint? Oftentimes some of the folks that used to work with me remotely all around the world, when I was in corporate, I would just IM them just to ask how their day is going. Tell me more about what's going on in their environment, how they're feeling about certain things. And this is totally unrelated to, let's say, a scheduled one-on-one or a meeting or something like that. It's just connecting, finding ways to connect with people on a very impersonal basis as frequently as possible to build that kind of relationship building capital so that at times where you have to have difficult conversations, those things tend to go a lot better. So I would encourage you to leverage technology to create more frequent interactions with people on a personal level to build relationships. You'll find that all of those sort of characteristics that drive humans to want to follow leaders, it doesn't change simply because you're in a virtual world. As a matter of fact, the virtual world actually gives the better means by which we can communicate with others to do that than actually the physical world, surprisingly enough, because you can communicate with more people using those technologies. So in short, leverage the technology to connect with others on a more frequent basis, and you'll find that even though it's virtual, that humans don't change. We like connectivity. We like predictive, repetitive actions, and preferably, hopefully, those interactions are quite positive. And if you're able to do that, then you can build relationships very, very effectively in the virtual world.
Thank you to everyone for their comments and questions. I'll make this the last question. Someone asked, what is the best way to show appreciation to your mentor?
Thank you. Gratitude. There's nothing like gratitude. Universally across the board, and that's surprising. And I try to we talk about this often in our leadership course, that surprisingly enough, humans are pretty similar. Although we have different cultures, different backgrounds, different upbringings, there are certain things that are universally true about most humans on the planet, and that is we all appreciate gratitude. And so that I would encourage you to be thankful of your mentor, let them know the value that you brought to their lives, and then just as much as possible continue to show that gratitude by passing it along to someone else. And I think if you do those things, then mentors generally feel appreciated.
Thank you so much. We hope you enjoyed the webinar today, the leadership series, and that you might be interested in growing and developing your leadership skills here at Lake Forest. We do have lots of other great events coming up. On June 6th, if you're still thinking about, if you don't already have your MBA, you're thinking about that, we hope you'll join us for an open house and class visit here at our campus. You can hear from students and alumni, attend part of a class, and enjoy dinner on us. By the way, as you look at these upcoming events, when you close the webinar, a brief questionnaire will pop up, and you can actually register for these various events if you're interested. On June 25th, we've got a webinar that's going to be focused on financing your Lake Forest MBA. So we'll talk about our affordable MBA program and how we can help you manage your out-of-pocket costs. The next Leadership Series webinar will be on July 16th. So get ready for that. That's going to be on the topic of managing up. So feel free to register for that when you close this webinar. And then lastly, again, if you're maybe thinking about pursuing your MBA, I want to let you know we typically begin the admissions process with an admissions appointment. This is a 45 to 60-minute meeting during which a member of our admissions team, like myself, can learn about your professional background and answer your questions about our program. Feel free to call Sue Sternberg. You've got her listed here on this slide, or you can visit our website to schedule your admissions appointment, or just schedule a 15-minute call if maybe you have a couple questions. Our admissions process is very streamlined. We don't require the GMAT. We're looking more for professional work experience, and we ask for a writing sample as part of the application process. Again, you can register for these events or schedule a call with our admissions team using the questionnaire that's going to pop up when you're done. And for any students and alumni joining us today, you can also on that survey indicate if you'd like to learn more about our new Ambassador Council. I want to thank Max Reed once more for today's presentation, and we hope to hear from you soon. Thank you very much. Have a great rest of your week.